This presentation provides an introduction to the disclosure schema and related schemas created by the Intellectual Property Matter Management Subcommittee, which is under the aegis of the Legal Electronic Data Exchange Standard Oversight Committee. For more information regarding the Legal Electronic Data Exchange Standard, see www.ledes.org. The purpose of the disclosure schemas is to facilitate the capture and transmission of data regarding inventions. How does your organization currently capture innovative ideas? My employer has historically published a Word template and directed its employees to complete, print, sign, and submit this invention disclosure form if an employee conceives an innovative concept. While a standardized form is preferable to an ad hoc note, a typical document, whether electronic or printed, introduces some significant drawbacks to the invention assessment and protection process. The primary drawbacks addressed by the disclosure schemas in whole or part are that typical Word or similar documents contain unstructured data, differ in content and format from other organizations' forms, and typically do not have means to check entered data. At work, I encountered problems trying to track or provide feedback regarding individual disclosures. Inventors came to perceive the disclosure process as a black hole, which disincents disclosure. I also encountered problems analyzing the corporate collection of disclosures, whether for budget or process improvement purposes. These problems arose primarily because even when electronic, the document data was unstructured and could not be easily extracted for analysis. My prior example assumed that an employee uses an employer's standard form. But what happens if the inventor and recipient use different forms? For example, what if a contractor is contractually obligated to submit and assign inventions, but uses a different form from the contracting entity? Or what if an individual inventor uses her own form to submit an innovative concept to a patent attorney who uses a different form? Even if the form is printed, interoperability problems will arise if the inventor's form does not provide data that the recipient deems necessary for further processing, or if the parties define terms differently or complete similar fields differently. The information can be transcribed from one form to the other, but transcription adds cost, delay, and error. Interoperability issues are even more significant when the forms or data are electronic. A computer-based application typically must understand the exact format of incoming data. If incoming data is in a proprietary format, the application requires specialized code to input the data. Returning to the previous example, translating the inventor's form to the patent attorney's format may not be cost prohibitive by itself. But what if an invention assessment committee needs to assess the invention first and requires different information? When new inventors, law firms, and inventing entities are added, interoperability costs and concerns rise. We have reviewed concerns regarding the unstructured nature and interoperability of invention disclosure forms. We now turn to validation, which concerns the quality of data. Can the form ensure that all required data has been entered? Is the data correct? Is the data entered in a format that the receiving app will understand? For example, is the date 02-03-2014 in day-month-year or month-day-year format? Validation can ensure or at least increase the odds that required data is entered, properly formatted, and at least within acceptable ranges. Without validation, data is less trustworthy and substantial cost may be incurred if accuracy and completeness are required. The disclosure schemas implement the Extensible Markup Language, or XML, and the XML Schema Definition, or XSD, language. XML and XSD are widely implemented open standards that are maintained by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. XML provides a standard means of defining data structure. The XSD language supplements XML and provides a standard means of validating data and facilitating interoperability. The disclosure schemas use XML and XSD to provide a means of exchanging invention data with structure, validation, and interoperability. Before we view XML code, let's look conceptually at the file or XML document that will contain the disclosure data. First, we must include at least one concept. The concept subpacket in turn contains data regarding the innovation and its inventors, development, resource requirements, etc. One can include additional concepts. For example, suppose the first concept relates to a device, and the second concept relates to use of the device, and a third concept relates to the product of the device. The disclosure XML document can also contain data regarding a file associated with, say, all three concepts, a drawing associated with one concept, and a folder associated with another concept. The disclosure XML document can also contain metadata, or data about data. Metadata regarding invention data can include information about the submitting application, handling procedures, or dates and times of different phases of the submission process. This slide portrays an XML document that includes only the elements and attributes that are required for validation by the disclosure schemas. One concept is required. Information required for each concept consists of a title and description of the concept and the name of at least one submitting individual. The XML document must also contain an ID that should be unique for the submission. Finally, root attributes define namespaces, essentially virtual dictionaries containing the schema definitions, date and time when the file was sent, the version of disclosure schema against which the XML document should be validated, and the location and name of the disclosure schema. This is all that is required to validate the XML document against the disclosure schemas. However, this is not all that is defined or otherwise supported by the disclosure schemas. As mentioned before, a disclosure XML document can contain information about multiple concepts, information about files associated with one or more concepts, and metadata regarding the document, its transmission and handling. Each concept subpacket can provide optional information regarding the concept itself, its inventors, conception, and development. This concept subpacket is set forth in a separate concept schema, which is referenced by the disclosure schema. The IPMM subcommittee also created a set of general, that is, not IP-specific, schemas that provide further definitions for elements used in the IP-specific, that is, disclosure and concept, schemas. These general schemas include the following. The personal info schema defines information about an individual and the individual's relation to an entity. The associated file schema defines information about attached or referenced files. The person name schema defines simple or complex structures for a person's name. The legal entity schema defines information for a legal entity, and the contact schema defines typical address, phone, and email structures. The best source of information is the schema itself. The schema should be available from the LETIS website and can be read within a browser such as Internet Explorer. The following standards and resources were used or useful in creating the disclosure schemas. The W3C, XML, and XSD recommendations are foundations. The World Intellectual Property Organization, or WIPO, coordinates data exchange among national and regional patent offices. WIPO standard ST96 includes schemas, quote, to be used for filing, publication, and exchange of information for all types of industrial property, i.e. patents, trademarks, and industrial designs, end quote. Influential patent offices have indicated an intent to implement WIPO standards. When that occurs, consistency of terms, definitions, and formats should facilitate data flow from disclosure to patent issuance. The University of California permitted the subcommittee to view a detailed data model based on the needs and practices of its various campuses. The subcommittee also examined other LETIS schemas, HR XML specifically for individual name and information structures, and various OASIS and National Information Exchange Model efforts. So how does one use the disclosure schemas? First, the schemas will be available at www.ledes.org and do not need to be stored locally. The application on the inventor's computer will create an XML document based on data entered by the inventor. At a minimum, this will include the required elements discussed earlier. The inventor's application will then validate the new XML document against the disclosure schemas. If validation is successful, the inventor's application sends the XML document to the recipient. The recipient's application should validate the XML document and then use the data contained in the XML document. This ends the introductory presentation regarding the disclosure and related schemas created by the Intellectual Property Matter Management Subcommittee of the Legal Electronic Data Exchange Standard Oversight Committee.